You're welcome back. This is Upfront. As I did tell you, my guest today is an extraordinary man. I mean, he's known, of course, and also he's one of the few people that you don't expect to be very active on social media, but is very active on social media, educating a lot of people. But he's actually taking his activism to a very distinguished place too. That is the Center for Democratic Development, CDD. It's one of the longest lasting, civil societies die in this country a lot anyway, longest lasting civil society grouping in this republic. And it was previously headed by Professor Jima Boadi. Now it's being headed by Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh. Prof, you're welcome to Upfront.
Thank you very much.
I hope you are doing well this evening.
I am. I'm quite excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you on too. But first and foremost, I mean, you were known to teach law for a very long time. Your legal opinion is very much valued as distinguished, extraordinary. Why did you decide to take up the leadership of CDD?
Well, thank you. I left the teaching of law in the U.S. At the end of the 2015 academic year. Okay. 2014 academic year, which occurred, of course, sometime in 2015. And I've been back home since, actually. I've been here quietly.
Oh, okay. When we saw you on social media, we thought you were still engaging from afar.
There are a number of people who actually thought that
because you still do diaspora activism. So
I still do that.
Yes.
I still make common cause with my good pals back in the diaspora with Professor Sari and others. But I've been back home for good since 2015. And I've been involved with CDD since its founding, essentially. Okay. I've been on the board since the founding of CDD. And in 2001, I actually took leave of my previous job as an associate in a law firm to come to CDD and help run it for some time. So I was a director of legal policy and governance for a couple of years before I returned to the U.S. to actually assume my position as a law teacher. It's basically, it's just another phase of my career. I mean, law, governance, constitutional law, constitutionalism, these are things that inhabit the same space, as far as I'm concerned, intellectually as well as in the practice. So it's basically taking what it is that I have taught and really moving it on the ground and making sure that it has at least some impact. I enjoyed my time in the U.S., but there are many more of me in the U.S., and I believe that here I could make a lot more impact. So my presence here really is explained by the fact that this is a point in my career where I think this is what I want to do. And I'm thankful that the opportunity has arisen in a place that I call home. I've called home for a long time. So
okay, there's a question though, and I'm sure that a man of your expertise will be very much valued in government. A man of your expertise will be one that any government will be willing to pick up. Why are you not in the Akufo-Addo administration or with the John Dramani Mahama administration? Why
I do not.
Civil society work?
Well, civil society is important. It's really a very important facet of our governance framework. You know, not everybody can be in government. Not everybody has the appetite to be in government or for politics. And even though I'm very much a political animal, as you can tell from my social media activism, I do think that there is still a lot of room in civil society to do the kinds of things that CDD does, which is really serve as, you know, another arena of influence on the political process, but do that from the outside. We do a lot of work that is important for the quality of governance in this country, and I think that we need some of us. Government shouldn't co-opt all of us. You know, if everybody who has something to contribute is co-opted into government, we would have difficulty trying to hold the government's feet to the fire, so to speak. So there's always, I think, something to be said for some of us remaining in civil society and doing the kinds of things that CDD does very well, which is really push the frontiers of governance. It's a public good.
Because that's the question I'm going to ask. I mean, what's going to be changing with CDD with you on board? You are more of the on the job, of the job activist kind, because I mean we knew Professor Mabodi, but he was not always on radio. So, but you are the one who is always willing to engage people, even on social media.
So maybe you've answered. You're giving me one answer. Maybe that's yes. My good friend Professor Jima Bodi was somewhat more media shy than I am, and so that's difference in style. It's really a difference in style. Intellectually and in every other way, we are very much a pair and quite engaged on the same issues. He's slightly more media shy than I am, and so maybe that explains why I'm even here. But I think CDD is 20 years old this year.
Yeah.
Professor Jima spent, together with Professor Bafo Ajimendia, spent those first 20 years building this institution.
Okay.
So I consider them the institution builders. And they've done an awesome job of it. We have a staff of 50. We have 2 offices, one in Accra, one in Tamale. And they've left us with some wonderful, beautiful building in the airport residential area. So they've left that legacy. My duty, my charge, I believe, is to consolidate that legacy and then to grow it. So I will be taking CDD through the next phase of its life cycle, which is really to consolidate the gains that have been made, but then to grow it. And that means, for example, I can't elaborate on everything, but it means...
I get you.
It means, for example, that I believe that we need, civil society needs to build bridges with each other. Too often, civil society organizations operate in silos. Sometimes they even operate in competition with one another, even though what we are trying to deliver is a common public good. We are trying to deliver something of value to society and to the governance and the well-being of this Commonwealth. So I think we need to join hands a lot more than actually compete. So I believe in building bridges to other civil society organizations so that we can share a platform and do things together. And I also believe in going back to a form of civil society that we had before the Fourth Republic. There are many people who forget that what we call civil society today is not the form in which civil society was conceived in the days, say, of the military regime.
Yes.
There were the NUCs, there were the Association of Professional Bodies, the doctors, the lawyers. They were actually the ones who led in those days, before democracy, the ones who led in the fight against military regime and the like. That was our civil society, you know, the Catholic Church, the Catholic Secretary. Those were the political formations, civic formations of the day, and they really did an awesome job. I think that with democracy, they have somewhat vacated that space and left it to the CDDs and the IDEX and the Imanis, yes, to come into that space. But this is not something that the CDDs and the Imanis and the IEAs can do alone. So one of the things that I propose to do is actually to reestablish links, to bring those groups, those middle-class, largely middle-class professional groups, professional associations, back into the civic space so that together we can really push for the kinds of things that we believe in, which is good governance. I
get your point, but there's one question that I'm asking you, which is a very, very strong question because it has been very contentious over the period. CDD. Is CDD pro-NDC or pro-NPP?
Well, we thankfully, we've had the benefit of having said, when we first came on board, President Rawlings was in his second term, around 1998. The survival of our democracy was not even certain yet. We had not had a president leave office on his own or on the basis of a constitutional term limit running. We had not had a president or a party being voted out of power before. Now we've been able to cross all those milestones. The reason I say that is that CDD has had the benefit of being CDD both while the NPP is in office and while the NPP is in opposition. We've had the benefit of being CDD while NDC is in office and while NDC is in opposition. One thing we have learned is that the things that we do tend to make opposition parties happy, but tend to make governing parties unhappy sometimes.
It's very much like independent media.
Yeah. So basically, we've had experiences with both parties. There were times when, you know, one or the other political party would not even attend our events.
Yeah.
But then when they come into opposition, they find us very valuable because then they use the evidence that we gather.
Abamba in the majority then said that they're not cooperating with what they call it, the CDD.
That's right. That's right. So we've been in those spaces before, but I think that we like to see ourselves as partisans, not for one or the other party, as partisans for democracy, for good governance, for inclusive economic growth and development. And to the extent that those are the things we're pushing, we don't really mind who it is that is happy with what we're doing or who it is that is not happy with what we're doing is a public good. It's a public good in the sense that when it is available, everybody freely enjoys it. And not everybody would want or is able to contribute to it. So when you have a good that has that characteristic, those who feel passionately about it are usually the ones who are likely to band together and produce it. So what we're doing is definitely a public good. It inures to the benefit of all of us, where we really, our real client is the citizen. It's not MPP or NDC.
I get you. And I'm sure the point is well made. I'm sure we have another time to talk about how civil society is contributing to the nation's development.
That's right.
I want us to now move to the State of the Nation's address.
Wonderful.
On the face of it, in terms of delivery, in terms of style, in terms of the conduct of the president, of the minority, of the majority, how did it go for you?
Well, I think it's very hard not to score President Nana Akufo-Addo highly on his eloquence and the manner of his delivery. I mean, it's difficult to contest that. So I think on that score, on style, the eloquence of the delivery, definitely if that's what you're asking, he scores very high marks. And I think that, of course, this is a political moment. It is also a partisan moment of sorts. So I think the conduct of the members of parliament, whether on the opposition side of the aisle or on the governing side, was just as would be expected.
Interesting.
There's really nothing wrong with some of the little heckling here and there. It's become part of our political game and our political theater, and I think it was quite good.
I'm about asking you for your highlights, but there's a quote that's actually from this speech. It says, "Our nation is on the right path. We will build a Ghana beyond aid." With that in the back of your mind, what are the major things you picked away from this particular speech?
Well, again, using what we use at CDD to measure these things is to what extent does it consolidate our democracy? To what extent does it foster good governance? Does it build up our governance institutions? To what extent does it foster and promote inclusive economic growth and development? And I think if I take, for example, the latter, I think the last, I found it interesting that the yardstick by which the president proposes to measure the effectiveness of, say, these new development authorities is whether or not, first and foremost, they've been able to provide water and toilets. I think that is actually important. If I'm looking for inclusive economic development, I would want to see, because sometimes we get fixated with the numbers. You know, we get fixated with, for example, Bloomberg says that our stock exchange, you know, is one of the best performing, or was one of the best performing last year. How many people really derive their livelihoods or draw an income from the stock exchange? Right. So that is, for me, not the way in which I would measure inclusive economic growth. It is stock exchange growth is not inclusive economic growth. But if you told me that you were going to measure the performance of your development authorities on the basis of their ability to deliver, in the first instance, water and toilets to every community, possibly every home, that I would be happy to hear. So I think that I like that being used as a benchmark. My good friend, Professor Sari, used to call it WET. He says, all we need for a government in Ghana to do in the first instance is deliver water, electricity or energy, and toilets. And I think he too would be happy to hear that at least the W and the T are definitely some of the benchmarks here. So
the joint monitoring programs, what they call it, assessment of sanitation, really is based on these two, water and toilets and assessment.
So from the standpoint of inclusive economic growth, that was music to my ears. I really like that, because we need development that actually reaches the people, that touches the people.
But won't the criteria for the assessment be how we've been able to reduce, for example, open defecation?
Sure.
How we've been able to reduce cholera cases?
Sure, absolutely. Yes. That's why water and toilets are important.
Because there could be water and toilets available, but if it's not reflecting in the statistics on which is the reality.
It would be, because there's absolutely a connection between why there's open defecation and why, and the absence of toilets.
Okay.
You know, I would like to believe that there's actually a direct correlation between the two, almost in a causal fashion.
Yeah.
So we believe that if indeed we were able to get toilets delivered to every community, at least within reach, walking distance of every home, if not within every home, that would definitely reflect in the statistics that we have on open defecation. But that's not the only thing. I also was pleased with the part of the address that talked about increased allocation of funding to key governance institutions, the Auditor General especially, but not only the Auditor General, those institutions that we need to countervail the power and also to oversight the performance of government, of the executive. So the Auditor General is important, and some of the things that we're finding from the Auditor General in terms of the savings we're getting from an empowered Auditor General speaks to why it's important to actually resource that body. Parliament too is according to the President, going to be getting increase. We would have to see the budget.
Just so because you mentioned the Auditor General, he was here in your seat just yesterday.
Ah, wonderful.
And what he told me was that as of now, he's not received a peso from the 2018 budget. He's expected, according to law, to present his report in June. And that if he doesn't get the money from the beginning of the year, sending people across the country to go and do the audit,
that's what I was going to say.
Will be very much challenged.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That basically it's good. I mean, the pledge is good. We would have to see how it's delivered through the appropriations process. And if indeed the President gives us his word that these institutions are going to be exceptionally well resourced, and we find that that is not the case. Sure, that is what where you and us, you in the media and we in civil society will definitely have to take them to task. You know, so on that score too, I think I was pleased, and then finally on promoting democracy and deepening democracy. Okay. I also was pleased to hear him finally give us a timetable for the election of DCEs. The surprise there for me is that we've been debating in-house within civil society whether or not it is going to be on a no-party basis or the party basis. But to hear him announce that it would require a referendum means that they have decided that it would be on a party basis. Because if it was on no party basis, we would not have needed a referendum. We would just have had a supermajority in Parliament to pass it. But it appears that they've made a decision, at least the President has made a decision, that this would happen. That particular pledge or promise is interesting because there's quite a bit of pushback, I understand, even within the NPP on that issue.
That you may not have control of a DCE somewhere in the voter region who will not be sympathetic to your thinking about how development should go.
Exactly. It's been, I mean, that was for a long time, that is the argument that is being used by, it was framed as a security issue almost. So the so-called securocrats in the NDC who actually pushed that view, made that same argument that the DC will lead. You would lose. You would lose. Yeah, you would lose control of certain important parts of the country, which were not under your party control. So it's a very bold step, and I am glad that we have seen at least now an attempt to redeem that promise, which was again a manifesto promise of the MPP.
To those who say that, I mean, and maybe on that particular leg, would that really deliver participatory democracy on the ground?
It's
or it will be merely symbolic.
Well, I don't think that it is merely symbolic. It may be it is probably necessary but not sufficient. Is the way I'll put it, because I have always argued that it would be a bit, it would be somewhat anomalous to have local communities elect their mayor and then expect the mayor to draw their salary from Accra. So I see this as something that needs to be coupled with not just a transfer of substantial amount of resources to local communities, but also the power of local communities and, in fact, the obligation to be able to at least finance a good portion of their recurrent expenditure. I believe that if you are politically mature enough and entitled to elect your mayor, you must at least pay their salary, be able to afford their salaries.
The district assemblies don't seem to have the financial muscle when you go across the country.
Well, and which is why I believe that, you know, as we begin to elect mayors, the considerations that inform the creation of districts and the like would have to move from a largely political consideration to a largely economic one, that we must form districts and municipalities and metropolitan areas and the like that have a viable local economic base. So that at the very least, capital expenditure definitely would have to be funded largely from Accra. But I think that at the very least, recurrent expenditure is something that local communities should be capable of shouldering themselves. And I think over time, maybe once we go down this path, you know, these kinds of things will come later. So I don't think that this is the end of local democracy or local empowerment. It's only the beginning, I believe.
Okay. Generally, still on democracy and what's been done to empower the people. To those who said we didn't hear anything about the Right to Information Bill.
I have just come from a meeting of the Right to Information Coalition, and that omission was one that we all lamented, and we're really quite disappointed that to the extent that it is also, it turns out, you know, I was reminded actually by the members of the meeting that it's actually one of the NPP's manifesto promises.
Yeah, promises.
So it's
and the case was like the first year it would have been at least taken to Parliament.
So it's a bit surprising. We don't even know as yet where that old bill is. Of course, the old bill has expired just by the natural processes of governance.
Yes, the new Parliament has to start fresh.
Exactly. So we do not know where it is. But I'm hoping that the omission of reference to the Right to Information Bill is not to suggest, it's not to be taken to mean that the government is not, has decided not to make good on this pledge to actually pass it. Because if you want to fight corruption, as the government keeps assuring us, if the president is insistent on fighting corruption, and if indeed, as he reiterated today, I think the last time he met you, he made much of the fact that if you have evidence against my appointees, let me have the evidence. This has become a constant refrain, not only of this president, but of successive presidents we've had about this evidence question. And for me, I link the evidence question to the issue of access to information.
And that's very important.
If you want people to have evidence to back up the allegations that they make, well, make it possible for them to get access to information, because usually much of the information will be in the custody of a public official or public authority.
Of course.
Right?
Even in our work on some contracts, we are seeking to get ministries to give us some information. It takes a very long time.
Yeah.
So the get to is non-existent, it cannot be found, and all of this.
We cannot decouple the RTI bill from the fight against corruption. It's not possible. You know, they go hand in hand. If you have one, you know, you really must have the other. So I think that ultimately, I continue to be hopeful that the government will deliver on that promise. We need to see something. Definitely, by sometime this year, I think we need to have the RTI bill.
He talked about the special prosecutor.
That's correct.
But many have also said that it's unclear how this government is dealing with corruption, even outside the sphere of the special prosecutor in this particular case. They have talked about allegations against deputy chiefs of staff. They have talked about recent cash for seed scandal, and President's own comments about even an ongoing probe in Parliament. Does all sum up to you that this is commitment beyond the talk to fight real corruption?
Well, I'm happy that Ghanaians have come to a certain position that supplying the Office of Special Prosecutor Act or delivering on that promise is not enough. right? Because you cannot really outsource the fight against corruption to a special prosecutor. Special prosecutors come in after the fact. The law enforcement model of fighting corruption is usually after the corruption has occurred.
Yeah.
There must be some prophylactics that the government should have in its toolkit to prevent, to regulate, the conduct of government, to design the architecture of government in such a way that it would mitigate and minimize opportunities for corruption. So I think it is right that we are expecting more, and that we are not satisfied whether or not it is Citizen Martin Amidu or not. Fine, but that alone cannot fight corruption. And I think that I was a bit surprised that he went back to the staunch kind of defense of his appointees that he made when he met the media in that encounter. I am surprised, because I think it is
out there people have a different opinion about some of these ministers.
You see, so I think it's a risky path to take, unless you want to suggest that as president you know every single thing, every little thing
as more
about
information
everyone
out there we know.
Yes, so I would not take
so
that.
For example, he talks very fondly of the sanitation minister. There's a massive cry out there that we are not seeing anything in terms of sanitation. There are people who are even calling for the head of the minister in this particular case. If you hear the talk of the president, and perhaps this is also a small segment that has voices out there, but what is pertaining even in the media, is there a disconnect? Is the president in tune with what the people really think on the ground about the people he has appointed?
Well, I think one thing that really jumped out from his speech, which I also found interesting, was that as he did the sector-to-sector retrospective, he took that an opportunity at each time he got to a sector in his speech to praise the minister. That's interesting. It was
but even if you have not seen anything,
it was a reaffirmation of his confidence in particular ministers. So you wonder, well, if he didn't get mentioned, then what?
That's what people are saying out there.
So there's speculation. But I think that certainly on sanitation, there is, first of all, people did not really not many people agree that we need a central government ministry to handle sanitation. So having established one, I think that there is a lot of pressure to see that it would make an exceptional difference to the situation. Otherwise, normally, not just in Ghana, but everywhere globally, the sanitation is a quintessentially local government function. And so people thought that by creating a ministry at the center to handle this, the government was essentially elevating this to a different level of priority and a different level of importance. So
which will bear results immediately, which will be seen by the people.
Exactly, within a year. At least a year is long enough to clean up, if not the entire country, to clean up the central district of Accra at least. A year is long enough to clean up important parts of the capital city at the very least. And yet we haven't seen that. And the president says, well, give us at least by the end of the year. He hedged there a bit. There was clearly, you could see that he was trying to hedge by not, he said that there will be at least some progress to report when he comes back next time. But definitely, I found it quite fascinating, this attempt to use the speech also to give thumbs up to particular ministers. And I don't know whether it was a minister based or whether he was in the cabinet or he went sector by sector. So maybe if he had exhausted all the sectors, he probably would have given everybody a thumbs up. We're not sure.
But some say some were left out. Some were
those
clearly left out.
They were, but because he was doing it sector by sector, if your sector was not featured in the analysis, then by implication he didn't get to say anything about you.
But if your sector was not prominent to also feature in there, because if you are reporting to still what is happening in a year, you pick out the prominent issues and the highlights. Absolutely.
And we know that the president, that would be a long list for a president with this many ministers.
With 110 of them.
Well, not all ministers, but at least, given the sheer number, again, which many people have complained.
Did you get a sense that that number needs to be cut down?
Oh, there's no question. My view of it hasn't changed from day one. I think it is an unnecessary, it is a bad precedent in my view.
Okay.
Because especially if you make the connection between that and delivering and turning around the economy, then any president can say that. Oh, in order for me to deliver my agenda, I need 200. And don't judge me until
the end
of my term. That's right. You see, so then we will see the numbers creeping up, if that is the basis. Because there's no theory for me of, say, economic development or economic turnaround that says there's a connection between the number of ministers you have and how quickly or how amazingly you are able to turn the economy around. I don't see the connection, right? So I have not been persuaded by that from the beginning, and I remain unpersuaded that we need this number.
Even after 1 year, even after giving them plaudits and saying that they have done very, very well, especially the ministries he mentioned.
I mean, I think there is something to be said for sometimes breaking down functions. You know, if you deem them, if you want some focus on, say, you want to deliver on railway development, you know, you really want to deliver a certain, you want certain deliveries to be seen in the railway sector. It may be something, there's something to be said for saying, okay, because I want that, maybe I'll decouple it from the Transportation Ministry and focus on it as a project, as a special project or something. But when you convert every one of those projects or special projects into a ministry, I think you create a tendency where then government begins to grow and grow and grow. Because look, for example, at the Ministry of Sanitation.
Yeah.
You see,
once you
create a ministry, the ministry must justify its existence.
From water resources, works and housing.
Well, even the sanitation ministry, right? Yeah. If you don't, it's difficult to call yourself a ministry when you do not oversee any agency. So normally, if you create a ministry, there's a tendency for that ministry
to create an
agency. Then feel that, oh, because we are now a ministry, but we are not enforcing a ministry without any act of parliament to enforce, a ministry without an agency to oversee. Why don't we create a national sanitation authority?
Because that's what they seek to do, actually.
I hear there's talk of that.
And to them, that's what will make that ministry's work complete.
Well, but that is exactly
oversight.
But that's exactly what's going to happen. When you create a ministry, it feels that to justify its status as a ministry, it must create an agency. And then it must have an act of parliament to be able to enforce that law. Because these are the things that ministries do. They enforce particular laws, they implement legislation and policy, and they oversee agencies, implementing agencies. So there is this tendency, once you set you set it rolling this way, the government begins to grow on itself again.
But this particular ministry, to be fair, has a very ambitious aim, making first and foremost Accra the cleanest city in Africa.
And we can't do that without a ministry? I mean, so is that now
that's a very ambitious one.
But
I mean,
so
to
now
be
we
clear,
are establishing...
we have to compete all of the clean cities, make sure that we get ahead of them and beat them to it at every level.
Yeah, I mean, so we now have, so should we go around the world and figure out, okay, those cities that are clean, do they all have ministries of sanitation?
Not necessarily. I mean, the evidence of the ground.
I mean, so are we now establishing some causality between
the establishment of a ministry,
being able to make your capital one of the cleanest in Africa and having a ministry of sanitation? I don't think so. So again, even if we were able to deliver a clean city, the cleanest city, I would not attribute it to have, I would not draw a direct correlation or for that matter, even causality between the ministry's creation and that.
But how would that be fair when indeed, if the cities remain unclean, they are responsible for it?
Well, because then you could say that there are ways in which the existing municipal authorities, if you give them a different set of marching orders, so you think if the president's main charge to the mayor of Accra was that, look,
clean the city or get fired.
I'm appointing you the mayor of Accra. I seek very little from you. What I seek is to deliver me the cleanest city by this date. And let me know what resources you need to do that. You think that would not happen? You think that it's not possible you can have a clean city? Just tell me the resources you would need. it may be, not resources just in terms of money.
Okay.
Maybe certain arrangements, certain contractual relationships, certain projects. But the idea that you have to create a ministry for that to happen is difficult for me to buy.
Prof, we'll take a break here. When we come back, continue our conversation. My guest today is Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh. He is the freshest boss of CDD. After this break, continue our analysis of the State of the Nation's address. You're welcome back to Upfront. My name is Raymond Alqua. My guest today is the new boss of CDD, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, distinguished gentleman by all standards and qualifications, and a wonderful brain that has been, internationally recognized. We've been looking at the President's State of the Nation's address, and we've been taking sector by sector and not giving plaudits to ministers, but rather assessing the situation as it ought to be on the grounds there. So we left off on the conversation about whether or not the ministries are supposed to be maintained. We moved on to talk about sanitation and the things that are supposed to flow from that. I want us to look at one thing that is key on the agenda of this government, and the President has said that it is one of the biggest issues and also a national security threat, unemployment in the Republic of Ghana.
Absolutely.
He actually was of the opinion that the National Builders Corps would provide some 100,000 jobs. Already, EcoBank is promising to recruit some 3,000, which are supposed to be working or currently going through training at the Accra Digital Center. Now, the interesting part of it is that he made no mention of the 745,000 jobs the Agric Minister is said to have created. How do you think government is faring at the level of job creation?
Well, that definitely. I think that it's important that the government recognizes that is really the issue, right? Whenever we talk about the economy, it's not really about just what the president likes to call boring numbers, but really it's about whether or not the economy is generating livelihoods. It's really producing livelihoods. And unemployment is a key issue, especially within the youth population.
Okay.
So he's spoken eloquently in the past or in recent times about the youth bulge, which is really not only a major economic issue, but of course a security issue, especially given the kind of demographic that is affected by it. So again, I'm happy to hear, again, because we believe in inclusive economic growth. We don't believe in economic growth that does not lift all the boats, right? Because you can have economic growth. We've had economic growth that actually has enriched a small segment of
Indeed,
of
in
society.
the words of Dr. Barb Watson, that's what's called jobless growth.
Yes,
so
you can
growth
have
in a
jobless
section.
Absolutely,
it doesn't reflect in creating
you can have
jobs
jobless
for the
growth where a few people really make it. You create a lot of billionaires or a few billionaires, but they are not employing anybody.
And you're widening actually the poverty gap between the rich and the
you
poor.
are widening inequality, which really is a big security concern. So I'm happy that the government has this focus that it appears to have on making sure that the growth that the economy generates is growth that produces jobs, especially jobs for the youth. I mean, some people get ideological about how you create these jobs. I am not particularly ideological about whether or not those jobs are being created through a National Builders Corps or through a National Service Corps, any way you call it. I think that as long as they're not just make work, as long as it's not repackaging the same public sector job and dividing it up among 10 people, as long as you're actually creating additional value-adding jobs, I think that given the crisis of unemployment that we have, so to speak, I am willing to live with, even though I would prefer that the growth were coming from the private sector.
Okay.
The truth is that we have an economy that doesn't quite have a strong industrial middle yet.
Yeah.
We have agriculture has remained a big chunk of the economy, and then immediately we leap over the manufacturing sector into services.
Yeah.
So we've in fact have de-industrialized over the years. So we don't have an industrial middle, and therefore to create jobs without an industrial middle, so to speak, you need to bring that middle into existence, that industry. I suppose that's what the one district, one factory is trying to accomplish, to really repopulate, so to speak, the industrial middle that is missing. And then also, so I would want to believe that these otherwise statist interventions are merely a stopgap, and that it is meant to deal with a situation that appears to be a crisis.
Interesting. When we started with NYEP, it was the same idea of a stopgap. It's gone through revolution since now. It's called YEA, and it's still being used as a stopgap.
I seriously think that it is important, you know, for the sustenance of our democracy and for all manner of reasons, to really do something radical about the unemployment situation, especially among the youth. And so I would not really pick ideological bones yet with doing it this way. I hope, though, that over time that these things would really mature into a point where the government doesn't need to be the one that is creating the jobs, but merely providing the right policy framework, the right support for the private sector to be able to play its important role. The state is important all the time. In fact, in some respects, we need a strong state, not a weak one. I say we need a strong state, but not a big state. I'm not saying we need a big state. We need a strong state because there are many, many things that we still do in the economy that would be done better if the state were stronger than it is. There are many, many things we do in the private sector that I think would be done with greater efficiency if the state were a bit stronger than it is. So I'm willing to give the government some room. Nobody has come up with a silver bullet that solves this unemployment problem in Ghana. No expert I know has the magic wand. No party, left or right, appears to have the magic wand. So let's see, let's measure. I'm willing to measure on the unemployment side, measure by results. Let's see what it is that they are able to achieve. The one danger, of course, is that within the kind of politics that we're playing, anytime the government takes the lead in creating unemployment, there are always concerns that there's going to be a partisan skew to it. That this would be just jobs created for partisans and for foot soldiers. You know, so we at CDD, for example, we've been monitoring the government's 1 million, one constituency pledge. And the kinds of structures that are being put in place to deliver on that. I would not preempt
the development authorities in this case.
I will not preempt our report, which will be coming out soon, on the work we've done so far, tracking that process. You know, but so we are interested to see exactly how this plays out on the ground, so that it actually inures to the benefit of all Ghanaians, and it is not treated as a party project. I think that's our main concern. But as long as it is inclusive economic growth, as long as the job creation is inclusive, I think we would applaud it.
I want to bring in security. One of the challenges that this government had, obviously, was to do with the vigilante groups and also the hooliganism from these particular groups. And the president acknowledged on several platforms. And in the first year, it looked like a very strong issue because even when the president consistently spoke about it, it was still happening. Not so much was said about this time around, but do you think that we put a particular issue behind us?
Well, I can only hope so. It subsided somewhat. We haven't seen it on the levels where they were initially when the government came to. And these things tend to come, these convulsions, so to speak, tend to come in the immediate aftermath of a few months of a party turnover in government. And I think it really speaks to the depth of the frustration and destitution of the youth, you know. And basically, the worrying part is that these are youth. I don't particularly think that these youths are strong party people one way or the other. They are just, they supply their services to the highest bidder.
They are not ideologically inclined
I do not think so at all. They want jobs. They want jobs in whatever way they can find it. and it's usually in the economy that is not producing jobs. The way you get a job is to displace somebody who has it. So you see that when our governments come into power, there is this huge...
They rotate jobs.
That's it. You know, the same is a musical chairs game that is being played. And I think that, of course, while it's played, it looks neater and on the corporate side. You know, it looks neater on the corporate side because you get appointed CEO and to board. For those who don't get appointed to those CEOs and those boards, nobody announces their appointments to manage the toilets or to manage the...
They take over.
They have to, right? That is the way they've seen to be able to survive. So some of it is a structural problem, just the way in which our economy is not delivering jobs, the way in which our politics is structured. And also the worrying part is that it is creating an army of unemployed people who may be willing to offer their services almost as my colleague, my CDD colleague, Dr. Koja Santi has eloquently put it. There's a market for violence almost. There's a market for political violence. And some of these foot soldiers are just in that market looking for what political entrepreneur they will sell their services to. That is a concern. That definitely is a security concern we must worry about. These pockets of hopelessness that exist in different parts of our country, especially in the urban areas, and that are willing to offer themselves up to be used for one political game or the other. I'm really hoping that that will be the focus of the job creation, that it would reach those segments of the population, and therefore, so that we can contain this threat to
That's not a point, though. I mean, you talked about how the corporate changeover is mostly tidy. The claim in this particular case is that there's a new phenomenon creeping in where the change goes beyond top management. So, for example, a public relations officer of a ministry is changed. A public relations officer of some place like Ghana Gas is appointed. Is that healthy?
But by saying that it is tidy, I'm only saying it in comparison to the kind
violent took over that happens.
Exactly.
Yes.
No, I'm not saying that it's tidy in any approving way at all.
Okay.
In fact, I have deep concerns with the spoils system where whenever there's a change of government, I mean, we fight politics like it's war, and the victor then is entitled to the spoils of war and all of it, and the loser gets nothing. And here, the loser is even interpreted to mean, you know, anybody who is an incumbent office holder, whether or not you're a card-bearing member of the last party or the previous party,
or even a public servant.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't do a case-by-case assessment of performance. We do nothing. Some of them may be very, you know, well-performing public servants, really doing well in their particular jobs, but you must vacate it for my party person to come. I think we need to move away from that. We definitely cannot really, especially because the corporate sector, if you look at the state corporate sector, we have at least, we currently have about 80 or so still on our books. The government still owns fully or partially about 80 state enterprises. Now, that sector includes some of the biggest players in the economy, Cocoa Board, GMPC, many significant players.
Gas.
In terms of volume, the volumes that they control in cash and their significance to this economy, and also the leakages that occur in those sectors. I think if we don't begin to put the management of some of those entities on a more meritocratic, competitive basis and continue to do them by partisan criteria, we're going to have difficulty solving some of the corporate governance challenges we have from that sector.
I see.
So I really think that we must have, it is a bipartisan problem. We must come to some understanding.
And forgive me, but this question is also important because it's come up before. Can the state-owned enterprise CEO's salary be more than that of the president? The vice president doesn't think so. The finance minister rather doesn't think so.
Well, you know, my position on it is that if they were not appointed the way they are, you know, I am sympathetic to the view that if you are a political appointee who owes your job to the president, not because you
are qualified or you have an extraordinary,
not because you emerged out of a competitive recruiting process, a meritocratic recruiting process, but you were just handpicked because the president knows you or knows of your abilities. I think I'm sympathetic to the view that you should not earn more than the president. But if indeed we sourced your services from the open market, if we went to the marketplace and purchased your services in a competitive way with others who offer their services, then I think that there is room. I mean, I think the idea that you shouldn't earn more than the president, the argument breaks down a bit for me. You know, it is possible for me to see a situation where a CEO of a major public enterprise can earn more than the president, if indeed that's what the market would bear. I don't have a problem with that. But the way they are appointed now, I don't think you should earn more than the president.
2017, I mean, I've seen CD do some general review. How did the president fare?
So what we did not do, it's difficult to do an aggregate review of the government unless the government was just totally collapsed, right? You know, or just performed so well across all sectors that it blew everybody away. You know, so what we did is we disaggregated, you know, the government performance. What we did, we looked at political governance, even that we broke it down to bits. We looked at economic governance, corporate governance, different sectors. And, you know, but and that evaluation, those different pieces of the assessment were done by different experts and the like. I think what I take from that is that there's a general sense that the government, at least the president, has set the country on a visionary course, that he appears to have inspired confidence that people can look forward to a better, more prosperous Ghana. The question, of course, is the timelines for delivery and then the content, the rollout of those policies.
I get you.
But I think on the whole, the evaluation came out generally positive. I would say the generally positive with some caution.
I get you.
But for the first year, I think it is difficult to say. Even some of the opposition, and for each of the panels, we had some of the opposition politicians respond to our assessment. We invited government. For the most part, they did not show up. But the opposition assessments were not actually horrible.
That's interesting to see.
The opposition assessments were not horrible. I mean, they were actually quite moderate, and some of them actually were encouraging.
Ghana Beyond Aid, is it rhetoric or reality?
I think we at CDD and probably would like to use this opportunity, since you've asked me this question, to announce that we are working to convene a national conference on this very topic. And the way we see it is that it is easy to see it as rhetoric, but we see it as an invitation that the president has thrown to all of us as Ghanaians to begin to have a conversation about how, as a country, we move beyond aid. So we have accepted that invitation.
Do you see anything on the ground that shows that there is really commitment to Ghana Beyond Aid?
That is the key question. You're almost a prophet. You are actually anticipating this conference, because what we're going to do in that conference, and the tentative title is something like A Ghana Beyond Aid, moving from vision. See, we don't call it rhetoric necessarily. Moving, yes, we want to credit the vision. Well, I think most Ghanaians and most even Africans have actually embraced the very inspiring words of the president, and it's resonated well both at home and abroad. So we want to see it, rather than say it's rhetoric, we want to say, okay, we like your vision, but we want us to move from vision to action. Wow. So that is the real challenge, and that's what the conference is going to be about. We really want us to have a brainstorming session with diverse stakeholders, multilaterals, bilaterals, local experts, people with comparative perspectives from around the world, on how do we move Ghana from dependence to independence.
That would be very interesting. I'm sure we'll be so much involved in all of this. Prof, I'm so grateful for having you today.
Thank
Unfortunately,
you.
I've run out of time. Well, folks, that's where we tie the nice ribbons of
Thank
today's edition of Upfront. My name is Raymond Akwa. My guest is Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh. He's the new boss of CDD. I'm sure you'll be hearing of him. You make a promise to be consistent here.
I will make myself available when invited.
Thank you so much for listening today, too. And thank you, Prof, for coming.